Good afternoon and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Team Building in a Virtual Environment. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Team Building in a Virtual Environment. Everyone plays a role in team building, including supervisors with direct reports, project team leaders, and essential individual contributors. How we can each show up impacts the level of collaboration and the success of the group's work together. Remote teams can present unique and sometimes hidden challenges in their virtual spaces, especially without face-to-face opportunities. Optimizing the advantages of online work requires cultivating trust, psychological safety, and interpersonal connections while neutralizing conflict, disengagement, and burnout. If you think you should have this down by now and can't quite put your finger on what might be missing, you're not alone. In this webinar, we'll highlight current trends and needs of today's virtual teams, explore the different roles and key capabilities of virtual team leaders and team members, and lastly, identify some ways that emotional and cultural intelligence can build stronger virtual teams. It's a pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Karen Gotch. Karen is the founder and principal of Global Collaboration Insights, a business consulting and executive coaching practice that specializes in leadership development, global, virtual, and hybrid teams, cultural and emotional intelligence, and communication capabilities. As a consultant and executive coach, Karen helps engage and elevate people at a wide range of organizations, drawing on her 25 years of in-house talent development management at Fortune 500 companies. Karen earned her master's and PhD from the University of Minnesota and speaks at national and international conferences, and has served as an instructor at CCAPS for over 10 years. Thank you so much again for being with us and sharing your wisdom on this topic. Karen, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Shanta. Very happy to be here. Welcome, everyone. I am very pleased to be back to talk about this very timely topic. And as Shanta said, here are the 3 areas of focus today. At the end of our hour, I'll share my upcoming classes on these topics, which you can find on the CCAPS online schedule, along with many others that they offer. Those classes that I facilitate are leading high-performance remote teams, that'll be in March, communicating across cultures, and strategic talent management in May, and emotional intelligence in June. So I'm hoping that we can tie together all of these topics today and help you see some threads that you can pull through. We are going to cover a lot in 1 hour, but you'll be able to go back to the recording to revisit it. We're also going to have some interaction with polling. There are 2 options. The first is texting virtual teams, important that it's just 1 word, to the number 22333. Just be sure to watch the autocorrect so it's 1 word, virtual teams with no space. You should get the message below. You've joined Karen Gotch's session, virtual teams. If you get somebody else's name, type leave and try it again and just watch the autocorrect. Or the second option is go to the URL, polev.com/virtual teams. Again, only 1 word. Once you're in, just hold on until I start the polls. And Shanta will be putting the instructions in the chat periodically, and you'll also see them on the top of each poll slide as well. So I'll just give you a minute here to get that activated on your phone or your computer so that we can have a little bit of interaction. I know we have a very large crowd here today, and this is one way where I can feel that I'm connecting with you and that I get to hear your voice as well about how you're managing your virtual teams. Okay, let's see a little bit about you. Our first poll, where are you located right now? That's one of the most important things. One of the best benefits of offering something virtually is that we can bring in people regardless of location. So not surprisingly, we see that we have a large representation from Minnesota, but want to be sure to leave it open for our friends outside of Minnesota and outside of the Central Time Zone. And try not to exclude anybody. We know there are other time zones within North America and outside, and some of you may be on a plane or a train or an automobile right now, and you're in transit across borders. With our mobile devices, we can do that now, whether you're a digital nomad or not. All right, so it looks like we have a little bit of representation from all over. Happy to see that. We know the University of Minnesota has such a large reach all over the country and the world. So the next question, where are you working these days? So are you working all virtual or all remote? And we do use those terms interchangeably. Are you in a hybrid office situation where that involves a mix of virtual remote and also on-site? Or are you currently working all on-site? And maybe you're here today because you're interested in making a move to a different type of organization, or perhaps being a champion of virtual teamwork at your own organization. I definitely have a bias for virtual or hybrid work these days. I think we've learned a lot over the past few years, and many of us were working remote long before the pandemic, and the tools are catching up with us as well, making things easier. Okay, now the next question is, where do you want to be working these days? So if you had a choice, what would you select? Either all virtual and remote, that mix of hybrid, maybe sometimes in the office, sometimes not, or all on site. And you can see again, we've got a wide range here, and that's great to see because we all have a lot that we can learn from each other. We're learning as we go. And then finally, for our last poll for the moment, how many average hours per day do you collaborate with others online? So you can see at the top, you want to type in the letter or text the letter after your answer. So let's see what we've got. We've got a large number of people with that very healthy balance of 1 to 3 hours per day on average. But catching up are those of you who are spending at least half, 2/3 of your day, 4 to 6 hours online. And that's a lot. We know that causes some challenges and some stresses for us as well. There are a few people represented in the purple there, 7 to 8 hours. And let's go more than 8 hours. So we can see how, despite some of the benefits of this collaboration online, it can bleed over into our personal boundaries. And maybe some of us like doing that type of work. Maybe some of us wish we could have more balance. And that's up to us to think about what's going on. Now, there are a few people that aren't doing any work online with others as well. So notice the mix that we have in this group. Thank you for that. Just keep your devices handy and we'll do some more polling throughout the hour. Okay. Looks like we got the hang of the polling. That's great. We'll come back to it. And also, you don't have to log in each time. So just set it aside until we have that next poll up and running. So as we know, many of our workplaces are still in a state of flux. And as Adam Grant notes here, one overarching factor is flexibility, which means different things to different people and also different employers. He refers to the 3 Ps of purpose, people, and priorities that influence how we determine what's right for us as individuals. Later, I'll refer to 3 slightly different Ps in layering the foundation for strong virtual teams. Maybe you recognize yourself or someone in your family in one of these photographs, or you can certainly identify where you've been before, maybe where you'd like to be in the future. Let's consider the current state of virtual teams. As I mentioned, we're not all on the same page, and in many cases, it's still a work in progress. Here you see a provocative quote from Kate Lister. She's a thought leader in this space. And this is from her very recent interview on marketplace.org. And I'll read this quote for you. I know some of you aren't in front of your device, and I think it's worth hearing. The sudden shift to remote work didn't create organizational problems, it revealed them. Managers weren't managing, they were babysitting. Organizations mistook office decor for cultural connection. Whether your people are 9 floors, 9 miles, or 9 time zones away, they are already interacting virtually. So anything organizations do to optimize that experience will benefit everyone. Now, depending on your situation, your role, your preference, you may agree or disagree with this stance. I think we can all agree, though, that we have a vested interest in moving forward to address any concerns that may be impacting engagement and teamwork. and also agree that things are still evolving. Here's one reason why. There's a continuing dramatic shift in how employees are responding and what options they are requesting. And these statistics here bear that out. Notice the majority of employees that would look for a new job versus a call to return to office. And we're seeing that play out in a number of different industries and with larger big name organizations that get headlines. Not surprisingly, some of those reasons include a better commute, work hours, saving money, less time away from family. There may be concern about exposure to illness. The conclusion here in the study is that flexibility and negotiation are still key. We need to communicate with each other, and that's what we're going to talk about today. As things continue to change in the marketplace, so must we. And there's no saying that we have to have all the answers. So instead, let's be willing to test things out, invite others to share their best practices, and admit what's working well and not so well to adjust. So as Shanta read earlier, if you think you have this down by now and can't quite put your finger on what might be missing, you're not alone. Think about tapping into your self-compassion and empathy, giving yourself a break and giving others a break. We'll talk more about EQ or emotional intelligence. Also be open to some awkwardness and some nuances in your environment. We'll touch on CQ or cultural intelligence. Each virtual team has its own character and therefore its own successes and disappointments. Here are just a few of the missed opportunities to strengthen them. Awareness. It's essential to have a baseline, an ability to shift your perspective and hopefully shift the perspective of what you're seeing in others. Training is important to reskill, upskill managers and team leads. There may be some best practices, but there's very little formal training. It doesn't always come naturally to people, sometimes like new supervisors needing core basic leadership skills. Onboarding of both team leaders and members. Once we find the right people to lead or play a role on our virtual team, we need to tap into strengths and experiences that we might not know about. Roadmaps are helpful for building success and reminders of where we want to go, the directions we need to go in, or what we need to explore in order to improve. And speaking of improvement, having a method for ongoing evaluation and recalibration as variables change. We need to create a feedback loop to learn from where we've been. This is not a one and done situation. There's no foolproof recipe or an autopilot for how to run an effective virtual team. So let's do 3 more polls. We've got your device in front of you. I'm curious, what kind of training does your organization provide for building good virtual teams? Not surprisingly, it parallels some of the research that's out there that many people are thrown into positions just as often they're thrown into leadership roles. There are some best practices that we can learn about building good virtual teams, and we need to open ourselves up to that and open our organizations as well. So it looks like some of us are lucky and have many excellent opportunities, or quite a few of those, and there's room for improvement in others. The next poll is different. It's going to be a word cloud here, and if you want to enter more than one word, you can do that, but just put a hyphen in between the words in your phrase. Okay, and watch the autocorrect too, because you only have one shot here. What is one thing that works well for your virtual team? This is where we're going to see the crowdsourcing here. We've got a lot of expertise in the room. We've got a lot of great ideas, a lot of interest in getting things better. And it'll be hard to absorb all of this today, understandably, but we will be able to capture the results of these chats, and we can include those for your access later. But as we see, the one that jumps to the top is flexibility. So understanding that we can be flexible as a team, as a group, as one-on-one relationships between managers and leaders. Many other areas that are coming, popping up there: communication, cameras. Oftentimes cameras can make that difference. Technology as well, communication, collaboration. Got a lot of different great ideas that are popping up for us. And as you might imagine, what the next text is going to be, similarly, what is your one biggest virtual team challenge? Not surprisingly, flexibility comes up again here on the question about what's your challenge. So it can be the best thing going for you. It can also be a challenge. And we need to meet people where they are. So cameras on are not always the best thing for every situation, for every person. And we need to tap into that empathy and that flexibility. But how else do we mitigate some of these other concerns, such as isolation? How do we find that balance, the cohesiveness, the engagement? How do we keep people going? For those of you who said you're on Zoom or on your online platform 4 to 6 hours a day, 7 to 8 hours, more than 8 hours a day, how do we keep that energy going? How do we keep the momentum moving with our team? And we've got a lot of other great ideas here around common culture. We'll talk more about that with cultural intelligence. So thank you for your input there. And we'll have more polling coming up. So what you just said mirrors what we've heard from others on virtual teams. So here are the benefits that they've articulated from their remote experiences, and mixed with some hybrid too. So you'll see similar themes that you raised in your polling. Especially flexibility jumps out to me, and balance, as some that you said, you know, these are the good things. These are the things we're willing to give up something else for because it's so meaningful for us and our personal lives, trying to balance the work goals and the personal goals. However, there are valid concerns. Some yellow lights here. You may be feeling some of these yourself or recognize them in your team. Again, this idea of how do we build transparency with things accelerating and moving so quickly? We're all managing it differently. And not surprisingly, things like boundaries, mental health come into play here with our work-life balance. And then also thinking, what does this mean for me and my career? And how can I tap into the benefits of virtual teams, but also mitigate some of those concerns? Those benefits and concerns are reflected in these key team building themes that you'll recognize already. The difference is their need and absence, and the fact that they're magnified in a virtual environment due to some of the constraints or challenges, such as distance, reduced opportunity for connection, awkwardness of technology, lack of spontaneity, concern over new skills, fragile trust, reduced sense of belonging. It all feels very heavy, doesn't it? Particularly among newer employees. There are many exceptions, of course, but we need to find ways to intentionally dial into these building blocks and understand our own leadership development needs. If we do these right, or realistically, if we can hone in on a few key ones to lay the foundation, then the research is showing that remote employees can be happier than on-site employees. And we already know that engaged employees are more productive than disengaged ones. We also know that as much as employees seemingly prefer virtual opportunities, and your polling played that out earlier, they do have some concerns. They know the importance of developing key relationships and the influence on their own career growth. Add the record low engagement last year of only 32%, and including 18% who are actively disengaged, and it's clear that we're still dancing around trying to find the right steps, regardless of our role and our influence. While we've seen the hiring market shift with more layoffs in certain industries, employees haven't been afraid to walk. So back to good leadership basics. More than ever, we need to observe, listen, empathize, and respond to our team members. Let's not forget that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. In other words, we can't assume we're connecting well and that our message is getting through, especially as we're signing off and jumping on to the next Zoom meeting without a break. As mentioned, foundational principles for team building are equally applicable to virtual teams, and that includes the key point of culture. Culture is the shared environment that surrounds you and is successfully built on a foundation of trusting relationships among a leader and team members. It's built on people understanding what they are to do, how their capabilities will be leveraged, and how their work fits into the total context of organizational goals. It's also built on processes in place, which create an environment of open communication and inclusive decision-making. Although I said there's no foolproof recipe or formula, I propose 3 Ps for strong virtual teams of purpose, process, and most importantly, people, which if done well will lead to the equally important 3 Cs of credibility, communication, and collaboration. The difference here between regular teams and our virtual teams is we need to take the fundamentals and boost them for virtual environments, taking extra time, extra attention, and extra intention. It may be more effort, but the work on the front end pays dividends. And team leads need to be prepared, and team members need to be accountable as partners. So our next activity here, I'm going to show you a full slide of strategies. And I'd like you to just make a mental note or a physical note of the 3 letters of the strategies that pique your interest. Okay, so I'm just going to go through those very quickly. First, we have 3 of them that are really about setting the stage, right? At the beginning, what are those goals and responsibilities? What are the team norms, expectations? How do we create some boundaries? The next 4 are more about logistics. How do we schedule things? How do we execute on those? What kind of events or collaboration activities are going to help us get what we can't get elsewhere? The next 2 are all about your learning. Keep up that growth mindset and figure out how you can stay ahead of what's coming next. And then finally, the last 2 relate to strategy and vision. So not to be set in where we're at, but keep looking ahead. Maybe the office policy and procedure will change in the future. We've seen companies change from a hybrid approach to an in-office approach, moving back to virtual. So for the next poll, I'd like you to enter. You have 3 letters you can enter. Which of these are speaking to you for purpose and process strategies? It's like a horse race in real time. I love it. It's great to hear that you're thinking about these priorities and you're figuring out what you can do. We can't tackle everything. So as we see here, the far and away the winner is establishing clear, repeated goals and responsibilities. Just like any team that you're building, we need to make sure that we're, starting out in the right direction and that we know where to go. Then we can work on improving what we're doing, getting to know each other as well. But before we know where we're going, we need to have some of that direction. And that's where a strong virtual team leader comes into play. The next 2 follow-ups are revisiting those team norms and expectations as things change. Employees, team members are looking to their leaders for some direction in that regard, but of course, reach out to them as well and ask for some input. And then finally, the third one, be creative in designing and evaluating a truly virtual hybrid culture. What does that mean for your team, for your organization? Benchmark with others in your network, but what works for you may not necessarily work the same for another organization. All right, let's do this one more time. This time, we'll repeat it with the people strategies. And these are arguably more unpredictable and challenging. So again, make a note of the 3 letters that you want to choose as priorities, and we'll do another poll. For the first 2, people react differently to change and transition. And there's so much of that when we're not only set in whether we're virtual, remote, or in person or hybrid, but also once we get going, there's still going to be continuing change. So thinking about how others are impacted. Next, this is about reaching out, small talk. Small talk has big value. How do we build that into our operations and not disregard it? Next are some additional ways to connect in a more strategic manner. Some of these may be more applicable to a leader, a people manager, but we can also have frequent one-on-ones, checking in and listening with our peers, with our managers as well. We can drive that. And then finally, showing some vulnerability and humility, especially as the virtual team leader. Understand that you don't have all the answers. And you're not expected to. In fact, it'll be a more engaging, a more belonging, a more motivating environment if you're reaching out and engaging people in the conversation. So let's jump to the poll and we'll see what your thoughts are around these people strategies, which might help you build a stronger virtual team. Okay, we've got an edge for assuming good intent, understanding that nothing helps us more than having that level of trust and autonomy and flexibility. Understanding that people are smart, that they want to do the right thing, and that they will be open to being a good partner. Take advantage of that, whatever your role is in a team. Understand that you don't have to do this alone. And then it looks like we have several more that are coming in second place, maybe building in and valuing small talk time in meetings, right? We're so go, go, go in our culture, our business culture in particular. It may seem a little superfluous to add in, some conversations, small talk, but this can add quite a huge benefit to the conversations. So don't disregard the importance of getting online early, extending those introductions just a few minutes into the meeting. And then we've got another a layer of acknowledging change, transition to the future, spending frequent one-on-ones, checking in and listening, respecting others' input and willingness to partner. Got a lot of great enthusiasm here for these people strategies, and they're not the easiest. We understand that. It takes some time, takes some effort. All right, the people piece will continue to challenge us and motivate us and reward us, perhaps depending on your personality and your skill for engaging with others. Pre-pandemic, we were talking about AI and the technology-human divide in some cases. There's been a shift in the literature to a call for more human-centric approaches and getting back to human. I thought the quote about how this can't be managed by an app from McKinsey was clever. Now, this was before ChatGPT, so who knows, right? Stay tuned. But in any case, our emotions are a key ingredient in how we work and relate to each other in virtual spaces. So let's talk for a few minutes about emotional intelligence, or EQ, and how it easily connects to virtual team building. First of all, what is EQ? Here's a definition: focusing on its two-way nature and the power of awareness and action, our connections and communications with others. Daniel Goleman was an early researcher in this area, although not as early as Socrates and Know Thyself. Humans have been struggling for a long, long time to make sense of each other and to play nice. Adding the modern day internet has solved some connection problems, but it's added other challenges. One value of EQ is that its skills can be developed in both our professional and personal lives. Emotionally intelligent people share certain characteristics although to varying degrees. As you read these profiles, I'm sure you can think of one or more people in your circle whom you would say have either higher or lower EQ. All of these profiles fit in to this EQI model from MHS. And this is the assessment that we take in my CCAPS class called emotional intelligence. It's very robust, and I enlarged the different categories here so you can get an idea of the coverage. Some of them you may have guessed, such as emotional expression and empathy. Others maybe not so quickly, such as problem solving and stress tolerance. Today I'm going to touch on just 3 of them, but first let's go to 2 polls. You may have heard of the survey just out about how emojis are interpreted differently across generations. I mean, who knew, right? Another language to learn and interpret and mediate. For fun, pick 2 of your favorites and go ahead and text in the actual emojis. Or you can certainly type the word as well if you want to. Not only across generations, it would be interesting to think about how emojis are interpreted differently across different cultural norms as well, whether that's a regional or a geographical culture, or whether it's within organizations, or whether it's in the function, your job function. So how is manufacturing using texting and emojis differently than corporate finance, differently from your sales and marketing commercial group? So we know we've got a lot of work to do in this area, but I thought this was a good introduction to the power of emotions. And we shouldn't shy away from them. Emotional intelligence is not about being touchy-feely. It's about tapping into the strengths that we have with our emotions. And how do we use them to connect better with other people? All right, great. The next poll, again, one word or phrase, if you add hyphens between the words, what is the one biggest emotional intelligence challenge for your virtual team? Empathy is coming in number 1, it looks like, along with miscommunication and the affiliated communication in general. All right, now they're starting to fly in. We've got such a large group. It would take a long time to sift through this. We've got some great ideas here, and hopefully you understand through this polling that you're not alone, that everybody is struggling, at least somebody else is struggling with similar concerns that you have, or has similar questions about how we can make this work, because it is a puzzle. And I think these word clouds visually represent that it is a complicated puzzle. We're complicated as human beings. We add our emotions in. How do we sift through all of that and move forward with our goals? All right, thank you for that. When I've been facilitating and coaching, I've gathered some anecdotal feedback on what people feel is missing in virtual spaces and what they're looking for from their leaders. So I'm going to share 3 of those with you. So just 3 of those components from the EQI model. The first one is empathy, and that falls under the interpersonal category. Here's a definition, and this should not be surprising to you: recognizing, understanding, and appreciating how other people feel. I think the second piece sometimes trips us up. How are we able to articulate our understanding of that feeling in a way that respects others? And here are just a few general strategies that can be extrapolated to virtual teams. The past few years have brought this to the forefront, and while sometimes it's uncomfortable, leaders find themselves being asked to show more concern and empathy for the struggles of their employees. It's often not visible when we're in a hop on, hop off, cameras on or off setting online. And so taking time to really dig into how do I make sure that I reach out to others and show that empathy in a way that feels comfortable for me and comfortable to them as well. Another in-demand skill that I've heard in the EQ context is problem solving for better decision making. So virtual teams often make decisions even faster, sometimes without room or time to brainstorm and discuss or debate. Although some of our online tools are catching up and improving to help us do that. But problem solving in the EQ context is about finding solutions to problems and understanding how emotions impact how we make decisions by ourselves or with our teams. In the midst of all the change, employees are looking for some solutions that acknowledge or even neutralize some of the emotional influence and help us move things forward. So here you see just a couple of strategies that are general in nature, but can certainly be applied to a virtual situation, but just may take a little bit more time, a little bit of extra attention. And not surprisingly, again, in informal discussions, employees are seeking leadership that sets the tone for managing stress. Health and wellness have morphed from an HR benefits program to front and center of our conversations with our employees. Role modeling the humanness of stress can provide needed support and resources when casual drive-by conversations in the office are less convenient. We know that's one of the challenges of virtual teamwork, especially if we are moving from meeting to meeting to meeting without a break. It's very hard to grab somebody individually to the side, create that opportunity to just double check or check in with somebody. And so that is one strategy you can take on to just check in with people. It pulls on your empathy, your interpersonal relationships, and can help you manage stress and help others manage stress as well as they see you role modeling that. So again, that's just a teaser. It's just a taste of what emotional intelligence can add to our virtual teamwork. To continue connecting the dots between virtual teams and EQ, note how culture can impact how smoothly we flex these different muscles for relationships, empathy, decision-making, and stress management. And cultural intelligence is the next layer to explore. So paired with emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, or CQ, can boost virtual teamwork and collaboration. As mentioned earlier, a quick definition of culture reminds us it is part of everything we do. Many cultural dimensions include geographies or organizations or functions, among other layers of complexity that reflect our various individual experiences and our different backgrounds. When there are missteps, there is friction. When there are fewer frequent, convenient, open opportunities to address it, such as on a virtual team, then the risk is higher for continuing tension. Similar to EQ, there are ways you can develop your CQ skills to apply them to your virtual teamwork and leadership. Today, again, we'll just scratch the surface. First, a poll. What is the one biggest cultural challenge for your virtual team? One word, or if you have a phrase, add hyphens between the words. It wouldn't surprise me if we see some similar answers coming up when I asked you in our earlier polls, what are some of the challenges with your virtual teams in general? And then also, what are some of your emotional challenges for your teams? Now we're adding on even additional layers of complexity. And as you might imagine, we all come to this from a different lens, from a different perspective, and might I say plural, different lenses and perspectives. I think you can see right away how the board is hopping here with so many different challenges that we need to address in our team. And are we having the conversations that we need to have? Do we know how to have those conversations in a virtual space? How do we carve out time for it when it might not be convenient? We know we need to go back. There may be some difficult conversations that we need to have. How do we make that happen? So some of the most common answers here, again, communication, understanding, connection, personalities. But then going across the board from race, ethnicity, generations, personalities, technical backgrounds, our learning, our educational experiences, the multiculturalism of our teams. There's so much to dig into. So one way we can do that is through CQ. And here's a definition. So it is the capability to function and relate effectively to others in many culturally diverse situations. Similar to EQ, there are researched benefits or ROI for implementing awareness and action in this space. As noted, this is especially true for diverse teams who demonstrate high CQ, more so than for lower CQ skilled diverse teams or homogeneous teams. In my CCAPS class called Communicating Across Cultures, we complete the Cultural Intelligence Center's CQ assessment, and there are two parts as noted here. The 10 cultural values on the left provide a general orientation to your life, work, and relationships. It also highlights potential biases you may have towards those with different cultural values, but they do not predict your ability to work effectively across cultures. It's just a different way of working. We'll touch on just 3 of those briefly here today. The first one, which you may have heard of before if you've done any work in intercultural communication, power distance. So low power distance implies an emphasis on equality, that there's shared decision making. That may be across levels of job levels in an organization, across generations. You know, I don't think any of us are shaking hands or touching shoulders anymore, but the picture gets the point across that we are able to connect with each other regardless of some of these other variables. Where in a different cultural setting, on the right-hand side, a high power distance means that there's more emphasis on differences in status. You know who's going to make decisions because there's a chain that you need to go up. And as a new employee, you figure out what is that chain of command. And there's everything in between, of course. But we can think about in a virtual space, what do leadership and decision-making look like when we're not always together? Who has more influence? And how does that keep holding true moving forward? The second value we'll touch on very quickly is context. So direct versus indirect communication. Direct communication is low context, and that means there's an emphasis on the explicit communication that you use. In other words, the words. Words are important, and all of the words you want to include to make to show clarity to your audience that understands a low context approach. The challenge is not everybody operates from a low context approach in their particular cultural environment. The other approach would be more of a high context or indirect approach, where there's an emphasis on indirect communication, and more so than words, speakers and communicators rely on tone or context, the background, how we know each other, what doesn't need to be said, how do we read between the lines. So thinking on virtual teams, how do we increase our communication opportunities to support different styles and preferences? And lastly, the third cultural value I'll touch on is something called focus, and that's monochronic versus polychronic approach, especially related to time, which you may have heard before. A monochronic or linear preference means an emphasis on one thing at a time. Punctuality is critical. So meetings start and end on time where they're expected to. Dinner invitations, social events start on time, and your arrival is expected. Your work and personal life may be separate. There may be some different boundaries set up. On the other side of the spectrum, and remember there's everything in between as well, is polychronic or a non-linear approach, where the emphasis is on multitasking. Interruptions may be more okay. Your work and your personal life are more combined. It may be appropriate or understood that you'll be arriving to a meeting late. and that's fine. You may be arriving or expected to arrive at a function late, despite the invitation time. And so when we think about in a virtual setting, what are the cultural norms or expectations for start time, for small talk, for multitasking, and how are they amplified when we're in back-to-back Zooms? So I'm sure you can see how the rest of these 10 cultural values on the left-hand side contribute to the interesting discussions related to virtual teams. The second part of the CQ assessment scores 4 CQ capabilities. The first of those is CQ drive, and that represents your level of interest, persistence, and confidence during multicultural interactions. It's measured by certain scores in your intrinsic interest, extrinsic interest, and self-efficacy. So what is giving you that momentum, that drive, that confidence that you know that you can succeed in a multicultural situation and grow? Next up, CQ knowledge. That's your understanding about how cultures are similar and different. And a lot of times when we're just starting out with intercultural communication, this might be the one that sticks most with us. Maybe we're going on a trip somewhere we've never been. Maybe we're joining a new company and we're very unfamiliar with the industry or the cultural norms. And we go out and we seek information because the internet is full of do's and don'ts and tips and tricks. But it goes beyond that as well. So this assessment will score you on your knowledge of business systems across different cultures, different values and norms, sociolinguistics, how language is used in a particular cultural group, and leadership, how are leadership styles different according to countries, according to industries, according to separate organizations. Next, CQ strategy. So it's not enough to just want to do something and gear yourself up with all the knowledge you need. Strategy is going to be your friend. That's going to be your awareness and ability to plan for those multicultural interactions when it's possible, when it's not a one-off situation. And that may include some planning beforehand, some awareness, either before or during an interaction, and some checking to see what's happening and how you're adjusting to it. And that may be happening during the interaction or going back and doing the lessons learned. And finally, CQ action is your ability to adapt when relating and working in multicultural contexts. Okay? And that is measured through speech acts, verbal communication, and nonverbal communication. So speech acts go beyond just the words that you're using. Speech acts are how, in a different cultural environment, do we get certain things done? So examples of that are, how do we apologize? What is the right way to do that with our speech, our verbal communication, what words, and what body language do we use? How do we ask for feedback? Right, so there are many, many different speech acts, but CQ action can help you with the, okay, now what? So we've got the, so what, now what do we do? How do we improve? And again, just like EQ, the CQ skills can be developed as well, and they certainly do relate not only to your professional life, but also your personal life as well, within your families or communities where you're engaged. Now, we're just scratching the surface today, but I wanted to provide you with just a handful of strategies to give you an idea of how these CQ capabilities could be finessed to improve virtual teamwork as both individuals and team leads. So for CQ drive at a very basic level, a very high level, think about how you might motivate yourself to learn more about the cultural aspects around you. With regards to your team, it might have to do with aligning expectations to make sure we're all on the same page. CQ knowledge, learning about cultures you interact with most, and that may shift over time. With your team, you could get together and discuss some of these cultural values. We went over 3 of them today, right? Power distance, direct and indirect communication, monochronic, polychronic. Figuring out where we come from with the different preferences that we have and what is the culture of our own organization. CQ strategy, you can stop and think, which takes time and effort, to anticipate and adjust your interactions. What lessons have you learned that you might want to employ in the future if you do have that opportunity for ongoing interaction? Your team can create explicit decision and communicating processes. So we get that nailed down as close as possible when we're kicking off our team. We need to go back and revisit that as the team evolves, but that can help prevent some miscommunications in the beginning. And then finally, CQ action. As it's appropriate, think about how you might want to adapt your actions, your words, your relationships. And then your team, don't neglect the diversity on your team itself. Ask people what experiences they have working across different cultures. Tap into them to be a part of this growth opportunity for your virtual team. Got a few more strategies here. We're running out of time today, but I wanted to put these in here. So if you go back and listen to this recording again, you can pause it, take a look at which one of these might land with you. For CQ Drive, some specific examples: soliciting your colleagues' viewpoints of effective virtual communication. You may have different ideas of what that looks like. What is effective communication? Maybe volunteer to lead a small talk conversation on a cultural topic at the start of your meeting. For CQ knowledge, pay attention to some of these overlooked sociolinguistic cues. And we're not just talking about foreign languages here and being multilingual. We're talking about sociolinguistic cues within your organization. For example, industry jargon, thinking about how many times we throw out sports metaphors, and empathize with the challenges. That's bringing your EQ in again, empathizing with somebody who's new to the organization or the geography. You might keep a running list of helpful cultural resources to explore and create a virtual space or an opportunity to exchange with others. You have an opportunity to be a champion for both EQ and CQ in your organization. And just a small step will move things forward. For CQ strategy, a couple of different things you can do. Reach out in advance to offer options for how your team might want to receive materials and how they want to participate. Do people want to be called on? What about the time zone issue? Are there different cultures or languages represented? What about people's time in a role? Do they bring something else to the team that you can take advantage of? Maybe providing multiple feedback channels, either online or offline, direct and indirect, positive and constructive, according to individual preferred styles of communication and also cultural values. This is where we can get into, again, that power hierarchy, how people prefer to give feedback in a group setting to their leaders or through somebody else. How is eye contact valued in a particular culture, and how might that impact how you receive feedback? And then finally, CQ action. One idea is to record yourself on one of your virtual calls and evaluate your verbal and nonverbal communication, and even reaching out to somebody, someone more experienced, for their candid perspective. A lot of themes here, you notice, on reaching out to people. Take advantage of those in your network or grow your network. For example, here, reaching out to someone who represents a familiar cultural group, maybe somebody who's worked with a business group or affiliate before that you haven't, maybe worked in a different country before. Propose a virtual coffee break or lunch and get to know each other. All right, so I know that this is new. You don't have a lot of background in it, but I'd be curious, which one of these 4 CQ capabilities piques your interest today? Not surprisingly, CQ action is pulling ahead. We see that a lot in our different work because sometimes we get stuck, right? We gather all the information we need, we have an interest, we go after it, but then we might hit a roadblock. We might have an uncomfortable situation and we're spinning and we're not quite sure what to do next. So focusing on how do we move it forward is going to serve us in so many different ways, not just with CQ, but EQ and our own leadership development and career professional development. So our recap today: just a few reminder points that I would like you to take away. Paired with emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence can boost virtual teamwork and collaboration. Now, as I said before, we only scratched the very surface of both of these schools of thought. There is a lot of research out there available and some additional training available too, if that interests you. Flexibility and negotiation are going to be key. We need to get people talking to each other and understanding that we're learning together. How do we find exactly where we need to be, and how can we give and take? More than ever, observe, listen, empathize, and respond. Sure sounds like it takes a lot of time, and there's no doubt it can. But once we get in the groove, once we start to develop that trust down below, that credibility, communication, and collaboration, that is going to boost our purpose, process, and people and result in our strong, effective virtual teams. So I've got one more poll for you. I'd like to hear one action or insight that you will bring to your virtual team after spending your hour with us today. And if you have a phrase, please remember just to add the hyphens one more time. Small talk, empathy, listening. Small talk is one of those things that can be easily implemented. I don't want to say it's easy for everyone, because sometimes people have to get outside their comfort zone to do it, but it doesn't cost anything, and people are usually open and willing to do it. If you're not comfortable, ask somebody else on your team to play that role. Got a lot of great ideas here. Someone said, share this info. Remember, you will get the recording afterwards as well. And so please do share the link if you know of somebody who could benefit from this information. Lots of great feedback. Thank you. I wish I could have a conversation with each one of you, but thank you for being here today. And to close up my last piece here, I promised just a little bit more about the classes. If you are interested in doing a deeper dive into any of these, got some opportunities coming up over the next couple months, leading high performance remote teams. These are all online classes. They're 2 days, 3 hours on each day. That one's in March, communicating across cultures. If you want to take the CQ assessment, that's in May. Strategic talent management, if you or someone you know is in the HR space and would like to learn more about how to integrate this into your development programs, that's in May. And emotional intelligence with that EQI assessment, that will be in early June. And so the URL is right there if you want to go out and search, but I'm going to turn it over to Shanta. I know we're just at the top of the hour here, Shanta. I'll flip to your last slide.
Yeah, thank you so much for your incredibly useful information. So Karen did have her contact information listed, and we do also. So if you guys have any questions, just feel free to send those to those emails. So our last slide here, we mentioned earlier, we'll send a link to the webinar recording within a week of today's webinar. And if you enjoyed this webinar and want to dive deeper into topic, there is a list of upcoming courses additional to what Karen mentioned on the last slides, and as well as the college contact information. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again, Karen, and you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.